then eventually it's me, but I want to give you a little bit of background. So one of my things that brings me a lot of enjoyment on Shabbos, I call it my own personal Oneg Shabbos, is that I love to sit on Shabbos morning. I wake up and make myself a big cup of hot coffee or hot tea, and I sit down and I take these, they give out these weekly alonim. So I love to sit in the morning with my hot cup, it's quiet in the house, and I read these alonim. And they're all in Hebrew, so I can't read all of them, and I certainly can't even read all of one, but I tend to skim through them and I get a lot of Hebrew Torah. And it's like my little own Oneg Shabbos, time of Oneg Shabbos. So about 2 years ago, and my husband brings them home to me on Friday night. I was like, ooh, I actually remember to say hi to him before, what'd you bring home? Remember, okay, yeah, good Shabbos, what'd you bring home? So anyway, about 2 years ago, he comes home with this little pile for me, and I see this one. I don't know if any of you are familiar with this. It's called Hashgacha Pratit. Okay, and it's put out by this Mahon Shar Bifakon. Oh, something new and interesting. So the next morning I get up, make myself a cup of coffee, and I sit down, I start to read it, and I am completely wow. Oh my gosh, I couldn't believe it. Now back then, 2 years ago, it was the first time I was reading, and it took me kind of a long time to read it, and my Hebrew reading was still only fair, and anyway.
Didn't it get better because of the bus Medrash? Reading?
Actually, I think this helped me get the bus Medrash. I know the truth. Okay. But so anyway, it comes out twice a month, and I started reading it, and it completely opened up my world. So I should tell you that now we all know that Amun and Bitachon are we're just part and parcel of our lives. But 2 years ago, now there's books and shiurim, and we have Dova Shaber who gives Amun and Bitachon at our house and also here. It's a big topic now in the world. But 2 years ago, it was still sort of at the tip of the iceberg before sort of the avalanche of it came. So when I opened this up and I started reading, I was like, oh my gosh. So I was thinking sometimes when you take a drink of water and you drink the water, you're like, wow, I was so thirsty, but you didn't realize it, so you drank a cup of water. So when I started reading this, it made me realize how thirsty my soul was for learning about Amun and Bitachon. And I just it was I just had every week I was taking and reading it and just becoming so inspired. And I guess I kind of felt at that time in my life that Hashem, as much as I frum and Shabbos and kosher and everything, right? And yet I still had this feeling, I guess, that Hashem was a little bit in left field, so to speak. It was sort of distant. But when you read the stories, this is what this is about basically, is these are all stories of Shkafat, the people. They actually have a cab that you can call in and listen. People call in with their own personal stories, and then they print the stories. So, when it's also in English, that you can't get it in the hard copy, but you can get it online. What? Yes, well, Hashgacha practice. And these are all Hashgacha practice stories of people. Right. So basically, Hashgacha practice story, it really has a way of bringing Hashem into our lives. So we hear these absolutely from small stories of Hashgacha practice to absolutely crazy, wild stories of Hashgacha practice. There's a way of saying, you read the stories and you feel Hashem. Hashem. The only way this story could have happened is because of Hashem. You see him in the stories. So for me, it was a tremendous amount of chizuk and with Hashem. Anyway, so I read a story that I want to share with you. That I read last week, and I'm going to explain why I want to tell you the story. So this is a story. So that's the background. So this story is told by a husband. And basically what happens is he says, we have a few children, Hashem, that are all, good and healthy. And then our last child was born with a kidney problem. And his kidneys, they're functioning, but they're only functioning at 20%, which is quite low. So in order to deal with this problem, they had to give him different types of medication. And unfortunately, there were side effects to the medication, but he needed it. And two side effects were, one of them was that he basically was losing his appetite. And the other one was that he would also throw up. Sorry, I don't know how else to say it nicely, but that's what happened. And slowly but surely, it got to the point, he was basically a year old, and he completely lost his appetite, couldn't eat anything. The only thing he could do was drink water. So they had no choice, and they had to give him a what's it called? They give the food to the stomach. Yeah, feeding tube. So they had to give him the feeding tube, and even that wasn't 100%. He would still also throw up occasionally from it too. And he still sometimes wanted to taste something. Whenever he would taste something, it would come out. Difficult, very, very. You can imagine, very difficult, ongoing situation for this for the husband and wife. So last Adar, the baby was a year old. He got pneumonia. Had to go to the hospital. On top of everything, right? He gets pneumonia, he goes to the hospital, he gets better. And the day comes when they're supposed to be able to be released to go home. And she's waiting for the papers, that page, they call them, right, to go out. And so she decides she's going to kind of walk around the hospital, take her baby on a little stroll. She puts the baby in the stroller and they start walking around, kind of waiting for the papers to come in. And she ends up by the department, the heart department, cardiology. And there's a lot of people waiting outside for their appointments. And she's standing there, it's very, and it's very full. And all of a sudden, what happens to her baby? Starts growing up, okay? And, she knows, okay, this is not the first, the 10th, the 100th, like this is okay, this is part of the protocol, this is what happens. And she knows already, she basically has to wait for them to finish, and she'll take them back and take off the clothes and get them cleaned up. And, so she's very calm. She knows this is what happens. So meanwhile, there's one woman who's sitting there, sees this happening, this very relaxed mother. And what does she start thinking? Oh my gosh, she gets so upset. I can just tell you in Hebrew, she starts yelling at this woman. And she says, Mat, I can't find it in Hebrew. She basically starts yelling, what is wrong with you? Look at you. You're so negligent. Your poor child, he's throwing up. Why aren't you doing something? You should be helping your son in front of all these people. She is yelling at this woman. She can't take it. She's yelling and yelling. And she starts telling some people, look at this woman. They start following people around. Look at this woman. She's so negligent. Her child, look what's going on. The woman feels like she's going to fall through the floor. She's completely mortified, embarrassed, frozen with fear. Everybody is looking at her. Her son is like throwing up and she doesn't know what to do. Completely like beside herself. And all of a sudden she remembers, what is this now? An eight-red zone, right? That people, there's people who know that when someone is embarrassed publicly, it's an eight-red zone, very strong time. She's like, oh my gosh, eight-red zone. And she doesn't know, what should I down for? She has the seconds, what should I down for? Or what would you think she's gonna down for? Right? What does she do? She closes her eyes, she goes deep inside of herself, into her heart, into her neshama. Hashem, what do I need? And what comes out? She says, Hashem, Yeshuot Gedolot. Those are the words that came to her. She said it twice. Yeshuot Gedolot, Hashem, Yeshuot Gedolot. That's what she wants. That's what comes out. Okay? So that's what happens. This is on a Thursday. This happens. It is. I need a big Yeshua. I need a big salvation. Big salvation, Hashem. This is on a Thursday. So they get released. So she takes the baby back. Whatever. Story ends. She goes back home. That's Sunday. 3 days later, she's back home and she sees her son take a little taste of something. She's like, okay, here we go again, right? She waits. An hour goes by. Son does not. He takes another taste of something else. Again, nothing. And it continues throughout the day. The son this child starts to eat and keeps it all down. And talk about the Yeshua 3 days later. So it was like, so now the son still needs a big Yeshua. He still has a kidney pump, but at least this terrible part of it is basically been stops. And the other second half of the story, 9 months later, she gives birth to a perfectly healthy baby boy. And the bris is held exactly to the day 9 months after that incident when she davened twice. Yeshuot Gedolot, Yeshuot Gedolot. So isn't that an amazing story? Well, he says the child still needs Yeshua, obviously. He still has this issue, but he can eat. And the whole throwing up thing, which is so traumatic for everybody, is finished. So anyway, right, it's an amazing story. Okay, but that's not the end. Okay, so when I read this story, I have to tell you that something personally happened to me. So I'm reading the story, like any other story, And all of a sudden, I read the part about the woman who's yelling and yelling at this woman, and I start to get this sinking feeling inside of myself. And I'm gonna be a little vulnerable here. And I started to get this sinking feeling inside of myself. You know, when you have those moments where you feel like sort of like your heart stops or time stops for a second. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that woman could have been me. Wow. I know, I get almost a little emotional. I feel like that woman could have been me. How many times have I been in situations and I've stuck my nose into it or said something, I've seen something. It was so clear to me that was good. What I saw with my own eyes was so wrong. And I had to tell them, I had to right that wrong. And yeah, I can see some people agree, I can understand this. And I've done it. And I can tell you, so that I've done that many times. So how could that driver do that? How could that woman do that? How could that, you know, and it's so quick to judge. You know, and it really, and when you see it objectively, like I saw in the story, I could see myself in it all of a sudden. You know, you can't see yourself when you see a story, you can see yourself. So it really, I really took a lot of time to think about this. And I just lost my train of thought for a second. And so, I want to say that even, I don't know if I actually, I thought about, I said, you know, I don't know if I actually would have yelled at that woman in public. You know, I'm an American, you know, proper, pretty much restrained. You know, I don't think I would have actually yelled at her, embarrassed her, but I certainly would have thought of it. I could totally imagine myself going home and saying to my husband, you're not going to believe what I saw today in the hospital. There was this woman and her baby was growing up and she was just standing there. She wasn't helping him. I couldn't believe it. She was like totally ignoring him and like, right? Can't we all imagine that happening? Thinking, judging, going home and telling someone else, a friend, your husband, your child, whoever, going on, repeating the whole story, being so judgmental. And so I really like took this to heart. I really spent a lot of time thinking back. It's like, okay, so now what? Now I see that's something that I do. What can I do? I thought about it and I thought, you know, what could I have done in that situation if I'd been sitting there? Instead of thinking to myself, look at that woman, I could say, look at that woman. Oh my gosh. You know, instead of turning the judgment, taking the judgment and turning it into compassion instead. And I feel like that the antidote, at least what I felt was like when I really gave a lot, I thought the antidote to judgment is compassion. That when we see things that look so wrong, instead of judging them, jumping to judgment, to jump to compassion. And to really think, you know, wow, like how come that person just caught me in front of my line? Who knows? Maybe that child that's a child that's sick at home and she needs to run home quickly. But to really try to tap into our own hearts, into our own compassion.
You have to really do that when you're driving on.
Exactly. That person cut me off, driving like a maniac. Who knows? I also try to do that. Maybe they have to get to the hospital or someone's going to give birth, you know. But to take the judgment, it's really trying to turn into compassion. And that, you know, and that I think that doing this, that we all can become better individuals. We can become happier ourselves rather than walking around with that sort of judgment. We can walk around with compassion, and that the whole world needs so much compassion too. So basically, that's my that's what I wanted to say. Is that to basically, I also want to say one little thing if I can add that story from Shlomo Carlebach. There's a story because I heard it recently. I loved it. One time when he was doing the story, what? Oh, okay, so there you go. When he was running the House of Loving Parents in San Francisco, they would have this Friday night big services, you know, and singing and everything. And at the end of the service, a man would come in with a guitar and start to play the guitar Friday nights. Okay. Now, Rob Shlomo was an incredible Talmud Chacham. He didn't have to be, you know, the time to know that's totally a sore. But you know what? He didn't say anything. The next week, second week, again, the man comes in with the guitar, plays it. Again, he doesn't say anything. The third week, again, 3 weeks in a row, someone doesn't say anything to her, someone doesn't say anything to him. And finally, the man comes up to me and says, you know, I want to tell you something. He said, I was testing you. I was waiting for you to tell me that what I was doing is wrong and I should stop. He says, now I see that you are for real. Wow. And the man then goes on, continues to embrace the Torah way of life and Judaism. And Rav Shlomo says afterwards, and I tell you, he says that I want to tell you that I never tell anyone what to do. That was his life creed. He never told anyone what to do. And he lets people be who they are and where they are. And that was one of the power of him being able to bring so many people. That was like the power of compassion, I feel like, also, and love for everybody. He was able to do that in his life.
I can attest to that. I want to ask them, what do they do? I want to ask someone, what do they do without something big? And he looked at me and said, you gotta give God a chance in your life. Which was an answer and not an answer.
Yeah, right.
He
He didn't tell you. He didn't tell people what to do. So anyway, I just want to give us all a bracha that if there's ever the situation that we are hushed, we should never be embarrassed if it happens. We should remember to use that situation, use that time as an equal, and also to remember to try as much in our own ways to try to use our, like, up the compassion factor and maybe lower the judgment.
Elisheva, I would think that, right, if you would turn it into compassion, that would be fruitful for you.
Oh, absolutely.
Very
Absolutely.
Absolutely. That was very brave of you.
What?
Really, not just because you did this,
Yeah.
that you were so honest. Very good. Halacha.
Oh, yeah, this is also for my mother who had a yahrzeit last week. Esther Leah bas Yechezkel HaCohen, and also from the birth of my new grandson, Moshe ben Sarah Bidit Bubele. His name is not Bubele. That's what I just call Bubele. And also it should be before Shlomo for Shlomo ben. I'm sorry.
Okay, so, all right. I used to do this thing where, like, I just thought I was too judgmental, and I would walk around the street and I would see some lady who's like this, like, disgusting hair, dress, like, but she would have her 2 children with her, and I would say, oh, look how nicely she takes care of her children. Like, I would change it around, or I would look at some guy, just getting up and sleeping on the, like, boy, his mother must have,
Right.
and then I think, his mother must have loved him and had, and took care of him, and he loved his mother back. So
Right.
it's like, turn it around.
Turn it around.
That's the goal here. Okay, so we're doing, without glasses, we're doing, we're talking about a mezuzah that fell off a doorpost. Okay, so a mezuzah, it happens, not in your life, but it happens. It's one of those things that make you feel bad, really. I mean, even whether it's on Shabbos or not on Shabbos, it's not a, but anyways, if it happens on Shabbos, so what are you not allowed to do? You can't take it and, screw it in or nail it in, or you can't even put it back on the screws that might still be hanging there. You can't replace it, basically. It's off till the end of Shabbos. But what do you do with the mezuzah? If it conveniently fell on a chair, then you can leave it. But if it fell on the floor, so it's, of course, inappropriate to leave a mezuzah lying on the floor. But it's muktzah. Mezuzah is muktzah. So what you need to do.
It's because it's no longer doing it. It's no longer.
You don't handle it. It's not something that you particularly. I mean, theoretically, most things are muktzah. So the case is okay. The mezuzah itself is muktzah. Okay. So if you need to pick it up, but you have to do it with some kind of a shinui. So, like, I don't know, between your palms or something. I don't know, until you put it safely. Okay, that's a good way. Okay, yeah, a spatula.
Rabbi Goldstein says to pick up muktzah with the backs of your hands.
What's that?
Just picking it up and moving it.
You can pick it up and move it, but you have to do it with a shinui. So however you do it. Rena just said with the backs of your hands. I don't know, the front, your palms, you're with gloves. I don't know. Is that right? Is that a shinui? I don't know. I had a friend who always, this was her shinui. She go, and then she would do the thing with her hand. Like that was the shinui. Okay. It was. She was beautiful. She was a really beautiful girl. So it really was a big shinui. Okay. All right. And then scraping, putty, or glue that's clogging a door catch or sliding door track. Yeah, he thinks of everything. I have to say, you have to give him a lot of credit. So you can't, and others like you had a work guy come, Friday afternoon, and he's like crazy with the silicone, and then you go to close your door, and you can't close your door, and you can't close your door. You can't close your door. You can't do anything you can't take it out. You can't putty any substance like that. If it's food, if it's like something that easily comes off, you just wipe it off easily, then you're allowed to remove it. But if it's anything that requires any kind, it's the same thing as like, cleaning out your drain, which we talked about a long time. It's the same thing as digging a stick into the ground. And if it's mud, you cannot move it. You can't do anything about it because then you have another malacha of tochen. When you have dried mud, it like immediately becomes it becomes ground up. It becomes a powder. So you can't do. Okay, I think we'll stop there.
Because Rachel give to the Dayan, she obligated to tell the story about the miracle.
She's not obligated. She chooses to do
No, I
so.
think
She
the
wants.
rabbi, because he gives the suda, she obligated to tell the story, otherwise.
It's up to her. It's up to her to decide whether she wants to.
I'll try to go there. My daughter and her husband and their daughter went on vacation in the Bahamas.
You want to stand here? Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Project. Yeah. So my